guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to Surviving the Survivor. It is the show that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime on trending criminal cases. And there is not a bigger trial, I don't care what you Karen readers say, in America right now than the Sean Diddy Combs trial. There is global media, and I can tell you that firsthand because I was there all last week in the courtroom. Today, we heard from a slew of witnesses. The first few days, it was primarily Cassie Ventura herself. Today, we did hear from her mother, Regina Ventura, who opened up about just how difficult this is, understandably, on her entire family. We also heard from the Punisher, a male escort who partook in these forced sex torture sessions, which is how our psychologist referred to it yesterday. We'll get Roger Rhodes' take on that in a minute. Early in the day, we heard from Sean Combs' former assistant for two and a half years, a guy named David James, who got emotional a few times. And lastly, on the stand today, we heard from the special Homeland Security, the special agent in charge of the raid on Sean Diddy Combs' Miami Beach home, as well as the LA home, and some of the things that they found there. And then a special question I have for the psychologist: why on earth does Sean Diddy Combs like applesauce on his cheeseburgers? I don't know if that's a deeper psychological issue. We will find out. Here are the best guests tonight. Welcome back to the show, Chris Lomax. He is the managing attorney at Lomax Legal here in the Magic City in Miami. He began his career with the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. He was a federal prosecutor, so he's got a lot of great insight as far as all that goes. Justin Paperny, guy almost played Major League Baseball. I think it was USC. Correct me. I hope I got that one right.
That's right. I got my helmet behind me.
There you go, right there. And he is an American businessman who specializes in crisis management, assisting individuals impacted by the criminal justice system. Justin himself spent some time behind bars for a white-collar crime, and today he just told us was his release day. So congrats to him on a special anniversary. And last but not least, this guy, a crowd favorite at STS, also a very smart psychological mind, Dr. Roger Rhodes, who specializes in something we all need, a therapist who works with dysfunction. And he also works previously and has and continues to with inmates behind bars. So there you go. And thank you right out of the gates here to Kim. So I'm going to try to weave in some of the testimony along with questions here. And today, obviously, was day 7, and we'll work our way backwards here. Leaving the stand today, and he's expected to return tomorrow, a guy named Special Agent Gerard Gannon. He oversaw the March 2024 raid on Sean Combs' Miami Beach home. It involved 80 to 90 agents, he informed the jurors, and 25 special response team members. And this is because they expected potentially armed security at Sean Combs' home, which we found out he did, in fact, have. I don't know if they were there at the time, as well as the possibility of being able to escape using the water route. So they went in with what they described as the quickest and safest option. So Chris Lomax, when I read that, 80 to 90 agents, and there was video of this. I think the video was better out of LA just because of the positioning of his home here in Miami, right on the water. But 80 to 90 agents, 25 special response teams. Is that overkill or is that necessary?
The explanation that I saw was that because of the expansive size of the property, that number of agents was necessary. To me, it feels like overkill. Because we're not talking about going in to get Osama bin Laden or anything like that. We're talking about a raid to collect evidence of potential sex trafficking, not a raid to capture a terrorist. So it seemed like overuse of resources and maybe sensationalization because of who the purported defendant was going to be. I think if it was someone else, perhaps we wouldn't have seen that level of a response, but I think the government was very excited about some of the various items that we hope to recover during the raid.
Yeah, by the way, for all you Cheers fans, George Wendt just passed away, Norm from Cheers. So it's a sad day for a lot of people who remember the show well. And, it goes down as an iconic American show. Justin, to you, we're going to get to this, but we heard a lot of testimony today about NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. We heard David James, the assistant, saying that he and at least one other person that he knows, that they were hooked up to polygraphs, that there was video surveillance, that he even had to read the NDAs out loud. What do you make of that as a guy who does, some PR and crisis management? That seems incredibly controlling. And obviously this is going to be, everything is damning and damaging to his public persona right now. But hearing this just goes to show the extent of the control, I guess.
So it sounds like he understood he was always in the gray area. He might not have viewed his conduct as criminal, but knew if some of this information got out, it could be damaging. So for a very long time, he was trying to control his environment, his surroundings, people who were beholden to him for jobs, enablers inside of this community. So he was very protective for a very long time. And now all of that information is coming out to great destruction, not just to him, but to his family, who has to endure. To Chris's point about how many agents showed up at the home. I've seen 80-year-old accountants indicted for mail fraud have 20 agents show up at their home at 6 a.m. with guns and the helicopters, right? The Department of Justice, with all due respect, they like to make an example out of people. They like headlines. They want to look good on television. They like the press conferences, and they like the coverage, and they like people to know they are doing their job. And someday these prosecutors and others could run for office, and they like the attention. So I would argue 80 might have been a bit much, but I've seen 20, 30 people for standard white collar crime. So to the question about these NDAs, he was very protective of his community. And I can assure you, when he was creating these NDAs in this very sick environment, he never envisioned someday it would be on trial for the entire world to dissect, fillet 24 hours a day.
That's a great word, fillet. I'm going to steal that from you. I'm always looking for good words. This is video, obviously, of Miami Beach, and I should know the location of Miami, not Miami Beach. That's the LA home, a nice, modest, tiny little home. Reminds me of my living room area home. Dr. Roger Rhodes. This is a man who is obviously, and this is probably the kindest adjective you could assign to him, dysfunctional, and at the worst, a lot worse than that. I really respect your take on a lot of things. And so just from like the 30,000 foot bird's eye view of all this, what is going on with Sean Combs? And let me just caveat that by saying, just now I walked in here and there's a person I'm friends with in the office, and he said, what if you have all that? And I hear this question all the time. You have the celebrity, you have the fame, you have the money. Why are you doing these crazy things? So what's going on with Sean Combs inside that little brain of his?
Joel, what you're seeing is a remake of the mobster culture. It's something that has been around. Al Capone, the New Yorkers. What we're seeing today is the 21st century mob. And when the amount of people they use, and they say, well, he wasn't a terrorist. He is a terrorist. He's the American psychological sexual terrorist. That's what Sean Combs is.
Yeah, very well said. Let me just rip the Band-Aid off here, Raj. So what's the deal?
Okay,
this guy's
let's go for it.
No, well, this is, I don't want to make light of it, but this guy testimony today shows that Sean Diddy Combs is obsessed with applesauce on cheeseburgers. Believe it or not, I've gotten a couple of emails that someone emailed me saying that they had a recipe to put a little bit of applesauce within the meat, but this is like slapping it on top of a cheeseburger. Is this some sort of psychological disorder that none of us are aware of, Raj? What's happening here?
No, not directly. It's indirect. What he's doing is he's messing with the judicial system, and he's showing them by doing the applesauce thing of who's in control. It's a control issue, is all the applesauce thing is. You know, if he would have said, you know, oh, I just want a regular thing, whatever the prison offers, I'll be glad. No, he's basically saying, I'm the boss. You got me here, but I'm still calling the shots, and I'm showing you by doing something ignorant like asking for applesauce.
There you go. Maybe it's a sweet and savory thing. Who knows? But Chris Lomas, back to the serious stuff here. And again, we were just watching that raid of the Miami home. This agent Gannon, goes on to say that inside, and this, I guess at this point, should be absolutely no surprise. There he's showing part of it, I believe, is an AK-47 or an AR-15. We'll get to that in a minute. But inside the bedroom closet, he offers testimony that they found, and I will list here: sex toys, baby oil, lubricant, lingerie, platform high heels. And then they found the upper and lower receivers. And I'm not a gun person, so I'm not even sure exactly what that means, but upper and lower receivers of AR-15s and 2 magazines loaded with bullets, and the serial numbers are completely scratched off. Chris, that doesn't sound, I mean, the sex toys, I get it. You're allowed to have the baby oil. That's come up a lot. And it just reinforces the issue about it, I guess, his sexual deviancy and all of that. But what about the issue of this AR-15 that we're looking at the special agent holding in court with magazines with loaded bullets? What does that do for the government case?
I would assume that the government is going to argue that there is an environment that he's created of danger to the victim in terms of whether she or he are free to leave. And so if you are in a place that you feel uncomfortable and you want to make a decision about whether you can go, and you see AR-15s in the room and you see people standing around, standing guard, I think that would communicate that you are not free to leave. And if you do choose to at least try to leave, you could be someone who's subjected to some extreme forms of violence. I assume that is why the government is putting that out there. I don't think he was charged with any weapons violations here. And so I think the only reason why you would show that in a case like this, and I'm surprised to a certain extent that it was allowed in. I don't know if the defense attorneys objected to it, but the only reason why I would see it as being relevant in this case is that there's a human trafficking charge that can be proven by showing force, fraud, or coercion. And so a show of force through AR-15s is pretty effective for most people. I don't think most people will feel free to leave if an AR-15 is an equation.
And so, again, forgive my ignorance, but that you're saying is going to the force, fraud, and coercion, and that's within the sex trafficking charges. Is that correct?
That's correct. I guess you could also bleed it over into organized crime if you want for the RICO, suggesting that serial numbers have been taken off, which is an offense, right? And perhaps that they were done, that was done at the direction of Diddy by someone else, and that they are using these things to create this climate of fear. That could also be evidence relevant to the RICO charge, but I would think it's more relevant to the sex trafficking.
Yeah. So Christy Wolf here says RICO won't hold anything. Chris, your reaction to that comment, but also, I mean, how did the jurors at the end of all this figure out, okay, this guy had AR-15s with serial numbers scratched off? That is a RICO charge, or that is part of the. How are they going to figure this out if I can't figure it out, and most of the people here are asking about it?
So I think you make a very valid point, and I think that our friend in the comment section makes a very valid point. I have not seen yet, by way of the summaries that I viewed online, a lot of evidence that would convince me beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty of a RICO charge. The government has not rested its case, obviously, but it doesn't seem to me that there's a substantial amount of evidence that's been offered to show that his deviant behavior, however you may define it, was part of a larger organized crime endeavor that involved other people committing acts that were necessary to the commission of this crime. I think you can make arguments about whether people who paid money to some of the prostitutes or folks who sort of told Cassie where to be or where not to be were part of that organized crime scheme. But to me, it just sounds like a bit of a stretch. And I'd be nervous if I was the government with that being sort of my lead charge. Because at this point, after what now 7 days of evidence, I just don't feel overwhelmed in terms of the evidence.
Yeah. And by the way, I spoke to, I guess, in a roundabout way, a former colleague of yours yesterday, who's a former federal prosecutor, I think at the SDNY and the Eastern District of New York. And she gave me some hope because she said this trial will not last 8 weeks. It's going to be over substantially sooner. She thinks maybe another 2 or 3 weeks, and it's going at a pretty fast clip. So I think that might be the case. Raj, to you, this question here happens to be up, or a comment from Becky Ireland, longtime STS Nation member. Too much money and power can often lead to self-destruction. If Sean Combs, and by the way, 50 Cent is trolling Sean Combs incessantly. And so he put up a yearbook photo of him with a caption that said something to the effect of most likely to have 750. He used the other word for sex toy and baby oil, etc. But Roger Rhodes, if Sean Combs didn't become this successful hip hop artist / entrepreneur, would he still be acting out? Let's just say he was, I don't know, working at a shoe store. Would he still be exhibiting this kind of behavior, or is it the money and the power that kind of drove him to get to this point?
Okay. He would not, his personality is not one of a shoe shiner. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He at a very young age, in the culture he grew up in, saw an opportunity. Okay. And he saw how he could enmesh himself in that opportunity and do what he wanted. The sex here is a tool. It's a terroristic tool. The filming is terroristic tools. The operation is one of sexual terrorism in the use of power. And man, it's hard to deal with that stuff and it not blow back on you. And so I'm sure he is not surprised at what's going on. And he wouldn't be anything if he wasn't who he was. The opportunity was already there. He just threw out who he was personally, fitting into that opportunity.
Well, if I could jump in for a sec. So part of in celebrities or high profile people our team has worked with, the problem is politicians, I would tell you, are the worst. We had a politician client. We couldn't even speak with them on the phone. Someone had to relay the message. So they have these enablers and people who are hired and tell them what they want to hear. We saw it in the Sam Bankman-Fried case, Elizabeth Holmes, the yes people. You look at character reference letters that are written on their behalf. They enable the conduct. There is no acceptance of responsibility. I suspect we'll see the same thing if convicted, when he faces a sentencing hearing, what that mitigation will look like. And then in time, the enablers and conduct, it becomes normal. What's so devastating in part amongst all of the charges is a lot of defense attorneys will argue, Your Honor, if convicted, this conduct was out of character. It was a brief window in his life. Look at the totality of his life when rendering judgment. But if you look at how long the conduct went on, it would be like, this is his character to break the law, to cheat, to do terrible things that victimize people. We know him no other way. I will say to 50 Cent, I read his book, 50th Law. I also wrote a book report about it. And if you were to read that book, he's doing exactly in that book. He's following through on exactly what he wrote in that book. And the motto is, be bold, be crazy, get out there. Consequences be damned. That's the book summary. There you go.
Well, he's pretty good at self-branding. I'd like to take a lesson or two. Justin, go ahead, Raj.
There's a big example on how do you build a safe fire. okay, versus how do you build a fire without burning down the forest? Combs is the second example.
I'll tell you what I think is, I saw a few interviews after Diddy was arrested of people going on like Access Hollywood and shows talking about the conduct and trying to blow the whistle on it. It's like you were there. You were watching it. You were part and parcel to what was taking place for a paycheck. And now you hear on the other side, they should stay off the grid and say nothing. So everyone has an agenda. I understand it. But I also understand, in working in the crime world for so long, that people fear their paychecks, their livelihood. And it's part of the reason they turn the other way, enable it, as you mentioned, rationalize the conduct. And before you know it, you're getting raided and you're testifying for the whole world to dissect and question. And I'm sure a lot of people have regret, but at the time, many convinced themselves there's no other option.
Yeah. Another question for you, Justin, because IGG Rocks has the question posed already. Is Diddy getting substances at the Metropolitan Detention Correction Center? So we've heard now about this severe opiate addiction, his med bag. We heard about it today, carrying dozens and dozens of pill vials. He would take Percocets before meetings. He would take ecstasy pills, you name it. He was on it. That's awfully difficult stuff. You heard Cassie Ventura talk about not Suboxone, but another similar drug to help her deal still with the opiate addiction a couple years later. What are the chances that he's getting stuff on the inside just to keep that withdrawal kind of at bay?
When I was in prison, there was a sign on the softball field that said preparing offenders for reentry. At the time, there was very little preparing offenders for reentry. My point is, they may make a policy statement and you may go to the Bureau of Prisons drug formulary and it may tell you what medication you're going to get. But at the end of the day, very few prisoners get the medication they need. It will be generic. It's incredibly difficult to get the medications you need, even if it's really documented. One of the biggest adjustments for people who go to prison who have been on medications for a sustained period of time is getting nothing, getting the generic, getting in a reduced dose, getting it at times they are not used to. So if he was on some medications, he's probably getting something, though I can assure you, I can guarantee you, it is not to the degree that he was. And it's one of the hardest. I mean, going to prison is hard enough, and then detoxing from all of these medications is a whole nother agenda to deal with. By now, I presume he's adjusted, but I can assure you he's not getting the medications he probably needs or is used to.
Yeah, and I remember the first couple of days he was at the MDC. A lot of people were talking about the fact that he must have been like writhing in pain because of the withdrawal, but who knows? I don't think any of us know what he's getting, what he's not getting in there. But back to Chris Lomax, a former federal prosecutor and now a defense attorney that you don't want to be on the other side of the aisle of. But we heard today from Sheree Hayes. His nickname is the Punisher. It's a pretty scary name, especially when you consider what he did for a living. He was a male escort. So he offered testimony saying he was paid between $800 to $2,000 per session, usually, typically by Cassie Ventura. And he described his job as, quote unquote, creating a scene, a sexy scene that was enjoyable to her partner. Now, some of the key testimony: Cassie greeted him at a hotel, I believe, for the first time in 2012. And Daniel Phillip, the other escort who has testified, talked about a similar encounter. He said when he bumps into Cassie Ventura, she's wearing a bathrobe with nothing underneath and a wig. With Daniel Phillip, I remember it was a red wig. There he is outside. And by the way, this guy is very similar looking to Daniel Phillip, which is interesting. But she told him she is now referring to Sean Combs as her husband. And she says, do not acknowledge her husband. This is him talking. Try not to look at him, and no communication. This is the testimony that he offered. I'll hold it up right there. So, Chris, to you, again, we're back, I guess, at the sex trafficking issue with this. Is this part of this force, fraud, and coercion? I mean, it sounds like it's the force, the fraud, and the coercion is actually aimed more at the Punisher than it is at Cassie, at least at this particular junction in the testimony. But what does the government need to do with this particular witness, who is now, by the way, off the witness stand?
So I don't know what his testimony was with regards to where he came from, whether he traveled across state lines to engage in sex acts for pay, but I do understand that there is a charge for that as well. So his testimony could be simply to button up that charge. As it relates to sex trafficking, just the summary that you read and what I've seen in other summaries, it doesn't sound as though he made a lot of headway in proving that Cassie was doing this against her will. From what I can recall, it seemed as though the defense made some points with him with respect to her disposition and demeanor to suggest that she did not seem distressed and she did not seem to be doing this against her will. So I'm not so sure why this witness was deemed to be an important one by the government. And maybe there's more to his testimony that hasn't been revealed in the sort of summaries that I've seen. But he seemed to suggest that she was a willing participant. Now, all of her testimony in the backdrop has already set the stage for us to understand that despite how she may have appeared to someone like this witness, she was always under duress. She was always feeling like she had no choice. And so we have to hope, if you're the government, that the jurors remember that, because jurors have short memories. We hope that they took some notes. You got to hope that they can say, let me connect these dots. And every prosecution has its own storytelling component. I think I might have put him closer in time to her testimony to show that, hey, this is one of the situations where she was in one of these freak offs or one of these sort of play along storytelling ideas, but she did not want to be there. Because if you have a situation where it feels like she did, that's more fodder for the defense to say, look, this is all just consensual sex. At worst, this is a case about domestic violence. But it's a strategy thing. All the evidence is still there from Cassie's testimony.
Yeah, we're going to get to the Tootsie Roll with Raj in a minute. A lot of talk about that. Thank you for that, Chris. So, Justin, to you, you're out in California, obviously the land of Hollywood celebrities. There was a show, that was a great show, Ray Donovan, that I probably should go back and watch. I only saw the first season or two, I think, but he's essentially what they call a cleaner in Hollywood, which I thought, was kind of part fabricated, part real. But in the testimony today, this guy not this guy, but David James, who was the former assistant, and I believe we have pictures of him as well, or at least courtroom sketches. He talked about how Diddy and this is him here, did in fact have a cleaner in Miami, at least, a person that would do exactly that, clean up messes for Sean Combs. Obviously your clients, some of them are high net worth individuals. What do you think? I mean, like, what do you make of this, that he's got a guy, that takes care of the mess, and it ain't you. It's not like an image, a crisis image guy. This is someone who takes things into, I guess, their own hands.
Here's what some very wealthy people do. They outsource. And when you have enough money, you can give enough money for someone to do a job that you will never have to do. Then to a degree, you're pretending it's not even happened. You're not a part of it. You don't watch it. And when you insulate or separate yourself, you then convince yourself, I'm not doing anything wrong here, or it's just the way that I can run my business. And to this point earlier, when you have people who will enable it and for the right amount of money will take on any job, even when they know it's wrong. We could argue at some point this silencer probably was doing something, thinking, this is different than how I was raised. I've crossed the line here. This doesn't feel quite right. If someone was watching, if someone that I respected was watching me right now and they were watching me clean up, how could I defend it? They couldn't. But when the money comes in the jets, in the cars, in the limousines, in the parties, you then rationalize or convince yourself this is part of it. We live in America. We lionize celebrities in this country. We love stardom. And there are people who get involved in this network and it's all they want. And they will do anything to ensure it is not let go. And so many people are destroyed. Even I watched the 30 for 30 with Lance Armstrong and all of these enablers that helped him and defended him. And then he ends up suing them. All of their lives are destroyed. They're broke. They wanted to help him. They wanted to be in that life. It was no different with Combs. But at some point, I can assure you, they crossed a line. This silencer did and said, this isn't right. But by then, you just continue. You just focus on the good things that you do in life rather than the bad. That's how you sleep at night when you're engaging in crime. By the way, you focus on the good, unless you're a sociopathic and nut job and you truly don't care. But that's how you convince yourself. You just focus on good things that are done. It's just a job. If it's not me, it would be somebody else.
Well, Justin, that must have been, I mean, that's a great point you bring up. And that must have been, I assume, very difficult for you because you had to know, and I don't want to, out you, but this is your bio and this is what the stuff you talk about. But you committed a white collar crime. You had to know what you're doing was, at the very least wrong and at the very worst illegal. So what was that like for you at night when you were committing these crimes? Were you saying, oh shit? Did you have to do exactly what you just said, which is basically convince yourself of the good you were doing and not the bad, but you had to think, hey, they're coming?
At some point, you can no longer convince yourself. I read this quote in prison from Nietzsche, who said, the value of something isn't what you attain with it, it's what it costs you. So I had attained money illegally, but 24 hours a day, it weighed on my conscience. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I neglected my family. I was in terrible pain as a result of these consequences. By the time I got to prison, I was thrilled because I felt like I'd been in prison for 3.5 years waiting and wondering what would happen. So some of these people, whether it's the silencers or other in this network, knew, and at some point perhaps their conscience was getting to them and they hoped at some point they would get caught, it would end, maybe I'm going to make enough money I could save up and then leave. But again, unless you were totally nuts, and I don't think I was nuts, some people online have called me nuts, you begin to wonder, can you make it without cheating? It's on you can't function in many areas, and that's why in some cases when you get caught, it's cathartic. You can begin to rebuild and recalibrate if you accept responsibility. I will say to this NDA culture, that was kind of part of my crime. We had an NDA in my case, and you think it protects you, but when it comes undone, that NDA or these indemnification agreements are part of the evidence that leads to your downfall. You think it's helping you, in the end, all it does is hurt you.
Yeah, by the way, someone told me that NDAs are no longer legal in the state of California. Is that true, Justin? Someone said that yesterday.
I don't know. I know in 2008, when I broke the law and went to prison, I thought it would protect me until the United States government sent me a plea agreement commenting on the NDA. So I've not been a fan of them ever since. That much I can tell you.
Well, I said this last night. I won't get into the details, but Fox News makes everyone sign an NDA, which really bothers the crap out of me. But Dr. Raj, you, someone said this guy doesn't look like Sean. If I looked at this guy in the street and you said to me, what does this guy do? I would say an accountant. I don't know. Probably the 4,737,000 thing I would maybe think is he could be a personal assistant to a celebrity. And then the 12 billion thing I would think is this guy is Sean Diddy Combs's personal assistant. So can't always tell, judge a book by its cover. But this guy did get highly emotional out there. And he broke down a couple times, but the thing that everyone's talking, Raj, I tried asking a federal prosecutor this last night. It didn't go so well. So I'm going to ask you, there's apparently an open secret in Hollywood that his nickname is Tootsie Roll, that he was, I guess, given by the man upstairs, a very small male member when he was born into this world, and it didn't seem to grow with the rest of him. Could this be the root of his problems, this so-called Tootsie Roll? Raj, come on, man. Give me...
Joel, what a great excuse. I got a small thing, and it allows me to beat the heck out of people and abuse them. Yeah, buddy. So all we need to do is go out before the court, measure everybody's part, and then convict them based on their part. Now, if somehow you have the part of a porn artist, you're in deep trouble because you're the most evil person out there. Or wait a minute, if you have it's a short one. Wait a minute. No, that's not what it is. I heard this that you said a while back that just hit about this whole thing is sociopaths. Man, are we seeing an incredible parade of sociopaths in this plan. Wow. No conscience, no idea of good and bad. It's, does this benefit me? Does it not? And certainly people do crimes, and wouldn't you love them to feel guilty? That's a humanness to it. But wow, there's a whole culture that has no empathy, has no feeling, doesn't care. Hurting people, big deal.
Yeah.
And do they want to look like Joe next door? You bet. You know, they don't want to stick out in a crowd. They want to blend into a crowd. And only when it benefits them, they show the ugly.
Teen Bean says Chris Lomax is about to bust a guy. I promise that's enough with the Tootsie Roll. We're moving off. I had no idea that there was actually a song called Tootsie Roll. Now I'm getting people sending me in the exact measurements of a Tootsie Roll, which is apparently 1 1/4 inches. If you've never known that.
What about the jumbo size Tootsie Rolls? I mean, wait a minute. Tootsie Rolls come in all kinds of shapes and sizes.
Off the Tootsie Rolls, onto back to Sean Combs. Justin, to you, and then I'm getting back to Chris, but I'm just thinking here, forget Sean Combs, but from a more macro perspective, I've heard people say this is going to have an impact on Hollywood, the way people perceive Hollywood. I personally don't think so, because anything goes in Hollywood. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, are we just going to be right back to where we were at, and it's going to be the next celebrity who's controlling the next assistant or whatever?
I think it's going to be different. People, whether they admit it or not, most people are driven by their own self-interest. And when you see tweets from Ellen DeGeneres and others over the years supporting Diddy, parties they attended, it begins to impact their own self-interest. I'm not going to get the job. I'm associated with this person. I heard names like Usher today popping into the trial. That is like brand devastation. Usher won't get indicted, it appears. Nothing is going to come from it criminally, but it impacts your brand and your reputation when you are now aligned with this person. So yes, I think there's going to be some change. People are going to give more consideration to people that they are associating with, who they are bringing into their network. I am absolutely convinced of that. And it would also be helpful if more people would come out and say, I made a mistake. I associated with him. I should not have. While I was not engaged in some of these things that he was doing, it did not comport with my moral compass. It's the reason I stopped going back. I shouldn't have continued to go. It said it's deny, excuse, blame. The PR spins do their job, focus on other things. And unfortunately, it doesn't lead to the lasting change that we would like. But for now, certainly, I think there are some changes because it impacts what people care most about, jobs and their income.
And Paulie here says, I think this devastated Hollywood. I don't see it, but Paulie, let me know why you think so. But Chris Lomax, to you, and this is a true statement, Kid Cudi is going to be testifying, I heard, either at the end of the day tomorrow or Thursday. He's obviously a hip-hop star, entrepreneur in his own right. His car blew up at one point, and the thinking is that Sean Combs was behind it. Sean Combs has not been charged in that particular case, as far as I know. But Chris, what is the federal government going to do with Kid Cudi, on the witness stand when he gets there? Another big name.
If I'm correct, Kid Cudi was dating Cassie. Is that
correct?
Right?
Yes.
And my understanding is that the allegation is that during the time Kid Cudi was dating Cassie, Diddy blew up his car, had somebody blow up his car. This is further evidence that Diddy was not afraid of using violence to effectuate whatever outcome he believed was appropriate for his own personal gain, right? And so what the message that the government is trying to send is that Diddy would do whatever it took to her, to somebody else, to some other person who's not at all involved in their relationship, to send her the message that it's my way or the highway. And that means if somebody has to get hurt, so be it. And so it's the communication through violence that the government is trying to demonstrate through witnesses like Kid Cudi. Now, obviously, I guess Cassie dating another person who's a celebrity can be another form of sensationalization. And you're bringing in this guy. There may be some other guys whose names they don't recognize. But look, I think another thing, if I was the government, I would say, look, this guy was not afraid of harming anyone. This is another high-profile individual. If he would do this to somebody who's high-profile, who has the means and the resources to research and investigate who did this to me, then God knows what he would do to the lowly man on the street, the person who's working in sex work, the person who has no funds and resources, the young 19-year-old woman who he recruited to be a pop star and then manipulated and then, you know, treated like she was an animal. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this man was capable of doing exactly what he's been charged of. I think that is what they're going to do.
And you are hearing from a real life former federal prosecutor, and that's an amazing point. And that, I'm sure, is what they're going to do. They're going to say, look, this guy is a celebrity in his own right. And look, he also had, we heard about testimony today from David James, the former assistant, about D-Rock. This gets convoluted, I know, but D-Rock was Sean Combs' security guy, one of them, and he bumps into Suge Knight, according to the assistant, at Mel's Drive-In, which is a great diner in LA. And D-Rock says to Suge Knight, I'm Diddy's boy. And he says something along the lines of, what are you doing in my state? And then D-Rock goes back, basically like a little kid, and tells Sean Combs this. And suddenly they're in a car with 3 guns. So it's just, you know, gang level type thinking and activity. But Chris, back to you, just to round out some of this testimony with the Punisher, and then we're going to get to Cassie Ventura's mother. Again, Cassie Ventura, according to the Punisher, the Escort, says, don't acknowledge my husband. He says that Sean Combs gave directions during the sessions. We heard this from the previous Escort, that basically he was directing it, everything from angles and lighting to the type of activity. And then he tells a story that on one occasion, when they're in the midst of this, Sean Combs throws a wad of cash on the bed. And Cassie stops and asks him, are you okay? She thought like he wanted it to end. And he says, I'm fine. And then at this point is when the Punisher, Mr. Hayes, says that Cassie would sometimes show signs of frustration, but never openly refused Sean Combs' instructions. And he went on to say, and I quote, and if you listen closely, this is disturbing. He said, I did observe sometimes a sigh, a wince. That wince is what gets me, because presumably from pain, but I never heard her refuse one of Combs's directions. And he went on to say the sessions would last, I mean, this is 8 to 9 hours long. He also said he never saw drugs or filming, which is important, and that he says he never saw Cassie Ventura high. That's a lot of stuff. But the point is here, if I'm the juror and I'm hearing that word wince with the Punisher, I'm like, this woman was essentially, you know, I don't know if you can define it as torture. That's what our psychologist did yesterday, but certainly very aggressive sex in its nature. What are the jurors going to make with this kind of testimony?
So again, I think what the government has to do in order to convey the message that it needs to convey is put this into plain terms. We have an issue about consent versus coercion. I'll use an illustration. 1619 to 1865, people of African descent were largely enslaved in the United States of America. If you were to go and poll each one of the slaves or people who owned slaves and say, on how many days between 1619 and 1865 did each one of them say, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be a slave. I don't want to be beaten. I don't want my children to be taken away from me. I don't want to continue to pick cotton for free. And if you use that as a litmus test for whether they were doing it willingly, then you might say, hey, everybody wanted to be a slave. They didn't say, I don't want to be a slave. When I talked to them, they just did whatever the master asked them to do. Well, I would suggest to you otherwise. Just because someone who's been placed into an institutionalization sort of context and is doing the same thing that they've been trained and groomed to do over and over and over again, day after day after day, doesn't mean that they actually want to do it, right? I have 2 small kids that wake up usually at 6:30 every morning, even on the weekends. I don't necessarily want to wake up at 6:30 every day on the weekend. I don't wake up and say, guys, I really don't want to wake up at 6:30 every day on the weekends, but maybe I don't. I just don't say it, but I do, because that is the life that I have to live right now until further notice.
When they grow up, Chris, I want you to know that will be what you miss.
Yeah.
You will long to have your babies wake you up at early morning when they grow up.
Deep thoughts. Yeah.
That will happen in a wink of an eye. In a wink of an eye.
Lomax, I can tell you, for some reason, for the second time in as many weeks, I'm not going to bring up private family information, but my wife decided to let my daughter stay home from school because she wasn't feeling great. I've now instituted a policy. You must have 107-degree fever. But anyway, the point is, this is a kid that used to get up.
Joel, that's a psychological issue. You and I'll deal with that after.
By the way, I'm sure when I scroll to the end of the chat, everyone's gonna be like, "Why would you say that?"
Can I take over the show for 1 second and ask the former prosecutor a question?
Please, 100%. By the way, the whole point of that is my daughter slept till 11:30 today. She got my genes. But go ahead, Justin.
So they're not similar cases, but they were sex cases. You remember Ghislaine Maxwell? She was sentenced to 2 decades in prison. Diddy's or Sean Combs is 55. At some point in this show, we may talk about how he accepted responsibility, what that would look like, not just for his sentence, his family, but these victims, right? And the healing process, because so few people really want to accept responsibility. But at 55, do you think if he pleads 20 years with good time, things like, I mean, it's a long time. He could be home at 70, right? But now he's on a path to serving the rest of his life in prison. Do you think if convicted, it's probably a life sentence?
I think it may be functionally a life sentence. You know, I don't think the judge will say life, but I think his guidelines could get him in there beyond the time that he would live under normal human circumstances. And someone told me that he had an offer of 5 years. I don't know if that's true.
I heard 12, but who knows?
I think it's all over the place. I don't know.
And you just think about that from a sentencing perspective. You accept responsibility, which is crucial. I know a number of people have gotten settlements. Money's great, but it doesn't replace the shame and agony, just the loss of dignity and humanity they've gone through. I know because I created victims in my case. And even though they were all paid back, many of them might still be in pain. You have to own that if you break the law. And it starts by saying, I'm sorry. So not only would it have started the healing process, 12 years, that's like 6 or 7 years in a low security prison where he'd be a celebrity and star. And it's like 6 or 7 Super Bowls. Now it could be a penitentiary. The whole thing changes. And again, back to this enabling concept, I presume the lawyers walked him through this, and it's just easier to maintain innocence. And there'll be some people, if convicted in prison, who will admire him for going to trial simply because of who he is. But the cost benefit analysis, I'm not sure it was put in front of him unless he's just convinced and adamant that he's not guilty, and he'll be found not guilty.
Yeah. By the way, go ahead, Rob.
Money talks, BS walks. And Sean's got the money.
But there are great criminal defense attorneys who would say, look, I'd love to make $3 million to go to trial. It's in your best. I'll take 500. I'll take him. It's in your interest, based on what I've read, that you contemplate or consider a plea agreement. It's in the interest of my brand in business, so people know I'm doing the right thing. Yeah, these lawyers are going to get rich, I know, and maybe they're convinced he has a shot to win, but so few celebrities. The only celebrities I know that pled guilty were all the clients our team had in the Varsity Blues case, where these parents paid to get their kids into school. Lori Moss, they all pled guilty. It's okay to accept responsibility and say, this is how I'm going to do better moving forward, with the victims first. The victims first. He just hasn't, there's an inability to do that, unfortunately. And it looks like he's going to pay the price. So will his children, and so will the victims, who will never hear him say in court, I'm sorry.
Very, very true and poignant. And by the way, his kids have not been in court this week. They should not have been in court last week if they were going to choose a week to miss. But I suppose none of these weeks are good for them. They were the twin daughters were apparently at the prom last night, which look, I mean, they're teenagers, that their friends know what's going on. It had to be really difficult on them. To that point, Dr. Raj, I got to ask you. So, I mean, Justin is talking about basically apologizing and taking responsibility. Do you think a personality like Sean Combs can realistically sit there in his own mind and say, hey, what I was doing to these people was horrible. I'm a despicable human being, and I apologize. Is someone like him capable of that kind of, I guess, self-reflection and admittance of the depraved behavior that he exhibits?
What you've got to ask yourself is is apologizing part of the culture Sean Combs lives in? And the answer is no. And you can go back to other places, Chicago, New York, and look at how many people did bad things and look at how many of them apologized. I didn't see anybody apologize. Any of the big people ever apologize. Even if they put them in prison, they blame this person, they blame that person. They took no accountability. That is part of a mobster sociopathic culture that Sean Combs is identifying with. And so can I imagine him saying, I'm sorry? Not in this lifetime. Would it be?
Yeah, I was wrong. I thought at first he would, like, so few people who go to trial win. We could argue innocent people probably lose at trial. There's this bias. It's your name versus the United States of America. It's hard to overcome that.
Right.
I initially thought he would come off as a martyr or say, I'm going to take one for the team and accept responsibility simply for my children's sake. Young children, they're not going to have to endure this. If he accepted responsibility, a lot of this information and perhaps might not have come out. Oh, and by the way, he would only serve 10 or 12 or 15 years, whatever that number could be. But then he can go to prison and say, they were out to get me. I'm a mogul. They wanted to make an example out of me. All of these prosecutors are advancing their career on my back. And I took one for the team to save my family. Some people would have embraced that message. Instead, it's like scorched earth and what could have been even 15, 20 years in prison. If he got 20 years, he's home in 13 or 14 years in a low security prison. Instead, he's on a path to spending the rest of his life in a higher security prison.
Oh my goodness,
separation from his family and kids.
Like someone with common sense. Now we're not.
Well, he's not done. He's shrewd. Yeah, he's smart.
Yeah,
he gets it. I think he gets it. I think he gets it. I think he gets it. Perhaps he's been abled for a long time. People tell him what he wants to hear. But yeah, I think he's shrewd, and I think he gets it. And I think he has convinced himself that he's innocent, and he's paying a lot of people who are giving them a message that he wants to hear. No different from Bankman-Fried, Elizabeth Holmes, and other high-profile people who go to trial and they're convicted in about, okay, they're already convicted 2 seconds later.
By the way, if you're new to the show, a lot of new names. Welcome. We do a nightly panel show just like the one you're seeing right now with the best guests in true crime. No big deal, Steve Cohen. Someone's asking if you can get J-Lo. If anyone can, Steve Cohen will have her booked by tomorrow morning. J-Lo, you've got an open platform. I know you're addicted to STS. A lot of people watch us that you wouldn't think are watching us. But it is happening. So J-Lo, you're welcome anytime. I'll even come to your place and we'll do a sit-down interview if you would like. And I will put on a clean pair of shoes so I don't scuff the marble floors on my way in.
Wait a minute, clean pair of what?
Shoes. Yeah.
Yeah, pronounce that. Well,
clean pair of shoes. Okay, so Chris Lomax. Now we're on to Regina Ventura, who is Cassie's mother. She testified for a short time, kind of late morning after the assistant and before lunch. And basically said, there she is, a beautiful woman. She saw bruises on Cassie's back and legs during a December 2011 visit. Cassie told her mother, and I quote, she didn't want me to see her like that. She, obviously has the maternal instinct and said at one point she wanted to take a swing at him, but couldn't get to him. That's the husband right there. She also confirmed talk about this 2011 email. And in that email, Sean Combs basically warns that he is going to release 2 sexually explicit videos of Cassie Ventura. And because he's such a good guy, he said that he's going to release one of them on Christmas Day and another, and then literally made them pay him $20,000, which is, that's a sneeze for him. And then ultimately they had to get a bank loan to pay that. And then ultimately he put the money back into the account. But what is this government examination on the witness stand all about here? Is this also to go to the sex trafficking primarily?
I think it goes to him being a bad guy. And it humanizes the victim in this case, right? Because for jury trials, it's a battle of connections. Who do you connect with as a juror? Do you connect more with the defendant, or do you connect more with the victim? Everybody has a mother. That's just the way that humanity works. You may not have known your mother, you may love your mother, you may not have had a great relationship with a mother, but everybody has a mother, and most people love their mothers. Most people can connect with their mothers. Most people see a woman of her age as someone who is harmless, believable, and should be shown compassion. So you humanize the victim and the mother that way. The next thing that she's good for is showing how sadistic and cruel and indiscriminate in his anger Diddy can be. If you would extort a woman like that for $20,000 when you are a multimillionaire, again, I'm arguing in closing that you will do anything. Mm-hmm. If you will be in an elevator lobby on video, kicking the living daylights out of this woman, if you will extort a woman of this age for $20,000 and make them get a bank loan so that you don't expose her daughter to one of the most embarrassing moments of her life, you will do anything. Mr. Combs would do anything. You don't have to believe me, believe him, believe them. That is what you do with a witness like this. You take that witness and you show the humanity that exists inside of Cassie, and you show the deviance that exists inside of Diddy.
I will just say, I'm sorry, that was said so beautifully, which tells me I'd pay money to read the character reference letters, if convicted, that will be written on his behalf in advance of sentencing. Because you just described someone with no character. $20,000 is a rounding error. It was just to embarrass, to humiliate, to shame. And I would pay money to read those character reference letters written on his behalf someday. I'll tell you that right now.
Right.
Yeah. I think we're going to hear the victim impact statements, but go ahead, Raj.
I'm just wondering if there's any connection between terrorist styles and what Diddy's done. And if there's not a direct connect, that terrorism and how they do things to terrorize people and what Diddy did is similar. It's just two different locations, same tactic.
I guess that's going to be for the jury to decide that. I hope the feds are listening to Chris for closing argument tips. Maybe they'll fly him up there for that. But Chris, back to you. So maybe from a legal standpoint, one of the most interesting things of the day is that Cassie Ventura's mother, as you just heard, Regina Ventura, gets on the witness stand, and when she's done being examined by the government, the defense says, "No questions, Your Honor. There was no cross. How come?"
Well, that's the best thing they could ever do. You don't get up and try to embarrass or discredit someone who's not a key witness in your case, who is very respectable and believable, because it makes you look like a bad person. And as a defense counsel, you need to have credibility. You don't need to be seen in the same persona as the defendant. You don't want to be part of the evil empire. You don't want to be part of the RICO. You're not a bad guy. You are just here to represent someone who's been accused of something very bad. You're not a bad person. And if you get up and try to make a fool out of this woman who's just told you, hey, I had to pay $20 to try to prevent this tape from being released about my daughter. She was embarrassed. There's not much that you can cross-examine there. So you lose points by getting up to say something that may otherwise be viewed as crass or harsh. I think you better sit down in most cases.
And Chris, this is a good question, and it's for you, I think. Do you think the defense had a mental analysis done for mitigation? I'm almost sure we're going to see the government bring in like a coercive control expert to explain why Cassie would go back. But what about the defense doing some sort of psychological analysis on Sean Combs to then put it on a label? They're going to say, well, this guy's a narcissist, sociopath. He was diagnosed, so this is why he is the way he is.
They may do that at sentencing, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but usually that type of thing is more useful for mitigation at sentencing, unless you have some sort of insanity defense that you want to present to the jury, you're all but admitting that he's guilty. If you put that on in front of the jury, you're going to say, hey, look, I'm sorry that he did this, but he had a good reason. He had a really rough upbringing, and I'm sorry. I hope you don't find him guilty, but it's because he's not all there in the mind. That's not the way that defense works. You can't do that. If I'm the defense, I just don't think you can. You have to decide that our argument and what they've said from the beginning of the case is that he's a bad guy. We're embracing the fact that he's a bad guy, but he didn't do RICO. He didn't do sex trafficking. Okay, he did domestic violence. Bad guy, very, very, very bad guy. Not RICO, not sex trafficking. You can't pivot now to, oh wait, he lost his mind. You're sunk if you do that. You got to stick with your defense.
In my opinion, if convicted, the best way to a shorter sentence for him is if through his own efforts, he tries to express to the judge more about his life through his own words. Our team has worked with some people who are not terribly popular. You can Google the name Scott Tucker, the payday loan industry, race car driver, American Greed. We did a video with him. It got 1 like to 1,000 dislikes, not popular, convicted at trial. The government asked for 40 years. He got 16 years, 6 months because he was able to express to the judge through his own words why he thinks he's a candidate for leniency. Somehow look at the totality of my life. And I think
what do you think, Justin,
he will have to do that.
Yeah. What do you think? So what do you think this guy said to the judge that actually resonated?
He was able through his own words to demonstrate trauma he had growing up and say, it's not a justification for how I ended up here. I lost a brother, I believe, to suicide. I've had trauma throughout my life. I was raised in this environment. And while I don't agree with the jury's verdict, I respect it. I'm going to let my excellent lawyers handle the appeal. I'd like to tell you more about my life and how I got here and perhaps some of the circumstances that define who I am. R. Kelly, for example, his lawyers at sentencing said all the things that he should have said. There was trauma growing up, and there might have been some sexual abuse growing up. And my thoughts were, those are mitigating factors. R. Kelly should be saying that to the judge, not his lawyers. So the more that eventually he will share, I think that's the only way he can somehow impact. He's going to have to write. He's going to have to speak in addition to whatever his high-priced lawyers are paid to say.
Yeah, well, Sean Combs better call Lomax and you now. Cooler by the Lake, Chris Lomax, can Diddy still grab that plea deal? If the government, I guess, thinks that their case is going well, probably not. But what do you say?
Pleas are always, well, I shouldn't say always, but oftentimes there can be a resolution if everybody can agree on something. This far down the line, though, I think it would be unlikely for Mr. Diddy to have that plea offer available to him, at least not the one that was made before the trial. There may be something else available to him, like the 20 or 25 year route. I don't think 10 or anything less than that would be available, because it seems to me that the government's evidence has gone in relatively well as it relates to trafficking and moving individuals across state lines. They may feel a little dicey about the RICO. I feel dicey about the RICO.
And all the money. There's someone in our community came into our community, like he's on the eve of trial and he wants to plead guilty, and the government's like, we'll take the guilty plea. It's not what it have been 18 months ago, because we have taxpayer resources and our time vested in your case. You're going to pay the price for these 18 months. So it's never too early to accept responsibility, I know, but even if he did, and it doesn't seem likely, it ain't going to be the deal he could have taken the day they raided him and took him to MDC. That much I can tell you.
Yeah. By the way, this is Yaha, but someone earlier in the earlier show, because I'm doing a recap after lunch every day, that the Fed's conviction or success rate went up to 99% in 2024. So it's even higher, and it's that you're literally, got to be a 1%er that's going to get out, either acquitted, exonerated, whatever the word you want to use is. But Diddy's got an uphill battle, no doubt. Roger Rhodes, this point about not being able to apologize, it just made me start thinking. Harvey Weinstein's in court as we speak. I don't think that dude's ever apologized. Bill Cosby, I don't think that he ever apologized. You got Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell. Justin, off the top of your head, like big celebrity names, do we know of anyone who's been convicted and then apologized for the behavior? And Rod,
sure. We had Our team had the opportunity to work with Massimo Giannulli from the Varsity Blues
Yep.
case.
Yeah.
We had the privilege of working with CZ, the founder of Binance, who went to prison for 4 months. Binance, the largest crypto exchange in the world. So there are a lot of people who might not agree with the government's version of events, right? Even people who plead guilty will go on to say, I don't agree with it. The odds of prevailing are low. Even people in our community who have been convicted at trial and memorial will look back and say, I wish I pled guilty. I see it differently now. But certainly there are high profile people who have pled guilty, accepted responsibility. And you look at the success that they're now having. Massimo, incredibly successful. Lori Loughlin, beginning to work again. Bill McGlashan, the founder and partner at TPG. He started the Rise Fund with Bono from U2, and Jeffrey, the guy from PayPal, came into our community, accepted responsibility, and moved forward. Now they're involved in influencing people in prisons and jails. Our nonprofit, prisonprofessors.org, influences 1 million people in prisons and jails. CZ, Moss, McGlashan, they support that effort. So they're not happy they were indicted. They accepted responsibility, but they said, I'm going to let this experience become an asset to help other people and use my skills and intellect and wealth. I'm not saying Holmes could have done that, but he kind of could have. He could have said, I did it. I'm going to accept responsibility, and I'm really rich, and I'm going to turn over the lion's share of what I have to help people who are suffering because of me and bring attention to it. Most would not have forgiven him, but it would have been a better step. So certainly some people have done it. He appears incapable of doing it.
Yeah. Raj, so just back to you on this. How come we see so few apologies, I guess, relative to the amount of crimes committed when we're talking big celebrity names?
Because apologetic people have a conscience, and they are not the lion's share of lawbreakers. The lion's share of lawbreakers are sociopathic. They have no conscience. They don't care, and like you said, I think very clearly, if you surround yourself, and some of the other guests too have said, when you surround yourself with, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're right, then you begin to absorb that. Yeah, I'm right. And so it emboldens you to take a stand.
And they're always the victim, and they always come off as the victim.
Oh,
it's never their fault.
Amen. And they're from that victim mentality mindset, as if being a victim justifies your choices, and it doesn't. And there's where the water hits the wheel. Do I think he has what it takes psychologically to step up and to say, I'm responsible and I'm going to apologize? No, I do not believe Sean Combs has a structured thought pattern that would allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead, Chris.
If I could just touch on the sort of sociopathic point and the pathology of a Diddy, I think there's some study that says that high-level CEOs, many of them are kind of sociopathic.
Right. But wait a minute. But I love that, and I've read that study. But what you're talking about, the CEOs, is they've taken on a structure of competence of saying, okay, I'm going to stay within this structure and be I don't care, and I'm going to get money, but I'm going to place a structure to protect the company from my deficit. That is not Sean Combs. Sean Combs is saying, I got this issue. Oh, wait a minute, I'm normal, and if I think it's normal, I'm doing it. Yeah. It's not why in Sean Combs' world. It's why not.
Yeah,
that's the difference between them and a CEO.
A few more quick things, and then we'll get some final thoughts. But Raj, back to you, because there's a conversation kind of going on in the chat. By the way, please hit that like button and subscribe if you can. And the best thing you can do, share the show with a friend. And by the way, the COE, if you're new, is the chief of everything, also known as my wife, also a former news correspondent. And she worked real hard on we've got a new merch store that I guess, I don't know, has a lot of options. So check it out if you're interested. But Dr. Raj, to you, people are saying celebrities can keep their fame and their wealth. When I was listening to this testimony from Cassie Ventura, this was not, I had to check myself, as Steve Cohen says, you need to check up from the neck up. Well, I was checking myself while she was giving her testimony. I'm like, I'm like, am I jealous? Is it sour grapes? But sincerely, when I was listening to her testimony, it sounded like a nightmare. Like, one second she's on a red carpet, then she's on a plane to Cannes, then she's in the Hamptons, and she's got to go to this party and that party and this red carpet and that red carpet. And is it an issue of all that glitters is not gold? Like, I mean, as celebrity, people aspire to it, but it seems to be, you know, most people's like death knell. They just, once they achieve it, look at a guy like Justin Bieber right now, not to throw him under a bus, and he could be related to this. It just seems to devastate people once they get to a certain level of celebrity.
Yeah, back in the day, there was a psychiatrist named Joyce Brothers, and she said, "I pray for people who get what they want, and I pray for people who don't get what they want." Because in both cases, there is devastation and there's a need for high coping skills in those moments. And people who are attracted to fame have low coping skills.
Yeah.
And so they get there and they don't have the skills to cope with being there.
Yeah. It's interesting.
And
I was thinking of what Chris was saying about CEOs being, not the COE, but CEOs being sociopathic. And there was a time where I was a business reporter on the floor of the stock exchange, and I used to interview a lot of CEOs, and they are like pathological. The ones I met, just pathologically, like weirdly, like optimistic and kind of like almost controlling in that way. Like they never see almost to a fault, like the things that I think they do internally, but they never voice it out loud. They're also a lot of tall white dudes who would drive me crazy. All these guys are like 6'4", and I'm all like looking up. I remember the guy who was at the time, he was the CEO of Macy's. He was like this good looking dude. And I'm like, don't make me look short. So, and I'm not that short.
But they're also, Joel, and this goes back to the point about why he may not take a guilty plea. I think they're often risk takers. Like, you have to be bold and willing to take certain risks to get to that level, and being willing to lose. Like, you have to be able to stomach the idea of losing big most of the time if you're going to sit in those seats. And I think that Diddy has been in a lot of seats where he took risks and he won. He bet on himself and he won. He was in college and he dropped off because he dropped out because he believed that he could do better going in a different direction than the safe route of staying in college and getting a degree. And so when he's faced with this option of taking a guilty plea and basically walking himself down a red carpet in the prison versus rolling the dice, being able to go free, pop his bottles and champagne and go to more freak offs, he said, I'll go down that road.
Wait a minute. Let's not act as if they convict Diddy and he's going to be part of a prison movie. Okay? If they convict Diddy, Diddy's going to bring Diddy to the prison. Okay? And he's going to Diddyfy prison.
By the way, Oscar Wilde's got some great quotes. Life is too serious to be taken seriously. And then Joaquin Rivera, welcome. That's a new name to me. Oscar Wilde, there are two great tragedies in life: not having your heart's desire and having it. That's what Raj was just saying. Justin Paperny, he's an American businessman. He specializes in crisis management. He works with people who are either facing prison or formerly incarcerated, as he was. Final question for you, Justin. In terms of public image and crisis management, I don't think Sean Combs is necessarily going to even need to worry about this, because I personally think he's going away for a very long time. But if this guy somehow gets off, is probably a bad phrase, gets away without doing time, is would he even be able to begin to salvage his public image? What would happen to Sean Combs if he walked out a free man? And your final thoughts?
I think back to OJ. While free, the lion's share of people felt as if he was a convicted criminal who wasn't held accountable, and it influenced and changed the rest of his life. When OJ got rearrested for that crime in Vegas, they're like, it's just karma. It was coming, kind of making up for what should have happened in 93 or 94. So no, I don't think he'd get on with his life. There would still be a support network who would stand alongside him. Of course, people on death row have a support network that stand alongside them, but he would be left with enough money to go live somewhere in the world. Some country, I presume, would take him in and shower him with gifts and accolades and everything that accompanies the rich and famous. There's no doubt. But no, I don't ever see him returning to a life of normalcy. He will live in the shadows for the remainder of his life if acquitted, in my opinion.
Wow.
Right.
And that,
and that's saying if he stays in the United States.
Raj, is there any, even more so than prison, Raj, is there a bigger punishment for a guy like Sean Combs than losing his fame and celebrity and now having to retreat to the shadows instead of being this larger than life figure?
Yeah, the biggest fear for Sean Combs is to not be noticed. That's his biggest fear. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. Sean Combs doesn't want people to be indifferent. He wants people to take a stand either for him or against him. And there's where he stands. And and I believe that he believes even if I go to jail, I'm still going to have people in my camp, and I'm still going to have support. And that was OJ too.
I will say, I was going to say, a part of me, I'm sure he loves his kids, and he wants to maintain this facade for them. And I'm sure when he visits with them, I'm innocent, I didn't do it, what they're saying about me isn't true. Perhaps accepting responsibility and acknowledging it, while easier for the victims and it could lead to a shorter sentence, it could damage the way his children perceive and view him. Instead of convicted, I presume he will continue to maintain his innocence. If he's convicted, his lawyers will come out and say, we expect to prevail on an appeal, etc. But a big part of the reason he could be doing this is for trying to maintain relevance and not shatter the image that his children may have of him.
That's a great point. And again, his kids were not in court, have not been in court this week, and who can blame them? And I think you guys know that I mentioned this, and I put out video, by the way, my Instagram, Surviving the Survivor, on X, where I podcast STS. But when the Combs family van pulls up at the end of the day and the sliding black door opens up, they've got a film crew in there. They are shooting this presumably for some sort of reality show that they've either optioned or will plan to option. Dr. Roger Rhodes is a family therapist in Greenville, South Carolina, and all around great guy. He's got that, it's not a funny South Carolinian accent. That thing is from Oklahoma. But we love Raj the way he is. Raj, final question, final thoughts. But will Sean Combs, if convicted, is he going to now control and run the prison like a gangster?
Money talks. That right there is the answer to all that. If you're telling me this is going to happen and Sean is going to be penniless and have no influence, I think you're in denial. I think he has so much money that the less he can stay there, the less he can get. He can get convicted, but I think he wants to walk away and say, "Hey, I never bent the knee. I never bent the knee." You know, that I was really innocent, and the system, the man put me down. So he's going to play, I believe he will play the victim role and live the next stage of Diddy. And I would love that to think that he might care about his babies, but I think that's not true.
What a sad, kind of depressing story on so many levels. But a man who I'm always glad to see, Chris Lomax. He is the managing attorney at Lomax Legal and started his career. He was a federal prosecutor doing exactly what you're seeing the government do, which is putting away people like Sean Diddy Combs. There's a question that was just up there, which Chris was basically, would he have a shot on the federal appellate level? I think that's maybe putting the cart ahead of the horse here, but your thoughts on that and your final thoughts here today.
So if I don't have another chance to talk, Justin and Rogers, it's great to be guests with you here tonight.
Oh.
And Joel, thank you for having me, as
Love having
always.
you. Yeah.
I do think that
let me be part of a smart guy. But dude, you some kind of smart guy where I come from. You the A student they talk about.
Well, I love where you live now.
I'll tell you my background.
Greenville, South Carolina, the Reedy River. I used to go running around the Reedy River out there. So I love that place. But we'll talk about that.
Good
but
stuff.
there's always going to be an appeal when there's a federal trial. I mean, you get it for free. Even if you couldn't afford an attorney, a federal public defender would draft an appellate brief challenging everything from jury selection to the witnesses the government was allowed to call, how cross-examination went down, whether he got enough time to do what he wanted to do, and try to find some sort of reversible error. So that is almost a guarantee. If not, his lawyers are ineffective. And my final thoughts is I'm still curious about where this ends. We heard about victim 4. I actually looked at the docket earlier today and saw some correspondence about a victim 4 and her being able to testify under a pseudonym. So are there people still lurking in the shadows who we have forgotten about that may come out and testify and offer some more explosive evidence to blow this case even further out of the water? I'm interested in what the defense is going to do. We haven't heard from the defense in terms of their case in chief. Will they put on a defense? Will they call P. Diddy to testify? So we have a long way to go, but I think that we're probably heading toward the end of the government's case. And by this time next week, we may be on to the defense.
Wow. And just since you brought that up, what are the chances the defense actually, I mean, look, the guy's an entertainer. He performs. Do you think that they actually would call him?
Super risky. There's a lot to explain. And I just don't know that you can explain, for example, that video in that hotel. That is a gruesome. And if I were the government, I would go with frame by frame. Mr. Combs, explain to me what were you doing right here? You kicked her in the head, right? You stomped on her. You grabbed her. You threw her to the ground. You agree with me. That was you. That's not anybody else. That's you, right? The same guy who's now you proclaim to be innocent. That's you on the video, right? I struggle with how that plays out very well, but he may have no choice because somebody has to get up there and say all of this was consensual. We were doing things because we enjoyed it. She did it by her own will. And I don't know who else can say that besides him.
Yeah, that's a wild thought.
Baby oil could say that.
The baby oil. That's we did see after that video, if you remember when the video was leaked finally, we saw him come out, Sean Combs on his Instagram, and that was a half-hearted apology. And it was obviously that was also like a me. It was all about saving himself. But we'll see. I'll tell you what, if he takes the stand, I might have to go back up to New York for that one because that would be.
I'll go with you.
Yeah, that'd be a wild day in court. But another amazing panel. Huge thanks to Chris, Dr. Roger Rhodes, Justin Paperny. We do bring you the best guests in true crime. I'll fight anyone, anytime, including Sean Combs over that. So we'll be back. I'm doing lunch live updates every day on this and then evening shows. We'll see you tomorrow, roughly 12:45. Love you, America. Love you, Miami. Love you, Greenville, South Carolina, Los Angeles, California, and, of course, New York, where all this is going on. Thinking about Regina Ventura tonight and the hell her family has had to endure. Guess, stick around 1 second.